Torah Life Ministries, come out of the world. Messiah people seek the truth.
Hello everybody, it's Paul Neeson with Torah Life Ministries, and we are continuing with our wonderful series, Yeshua Said. And we're reading this, probably the most popular, at least in my opinion, comment of Matthew, or scripture in Matthew, by Yeshua Messiah. But first, let me talk about Yeshua Said. This is a series that's taken away everything, the commentary by the people that translated the scriptures, and all the other scriptures by everyone else in scripture except Yeshua Messiah. And I'm showing everyone that the original covenant was not done away with like some people claim. We're just looking at the words of Messiah and talking what he wanted us to do and how he wanted us to do it. And we are up to Matthew 5:17. And in this episode, we're going to do Matthew 5:17 to 5:20. Now, if you missed any of the other episodes, you can go back to my website, which is www.healthwatchman.com, and you can see the previous episodes on there, or you can go to my YouTube page, which is thehealthwatchman.com. Well, we're going to look at Matthew 5:17 to 5:20, and there's several different translations we're going to look at, and then we're going to focus in on one translation, and I'm going to tell you why. But we're going to look at the New Living Testament. And in the New Living Testament, it says in Matthew 5:17, "Don't misunderstand why I have come. I did not come to abolish the law of Moses or the writings of the prophets. No, I came to accomplish their purpose. I tell you the truth, until heaven and earth disappear, not even the smallest detail of our Creator's law will disappear until its purpose is achieved. So if you ignore the least commandment and teach others to do the same, you will be called the least in the kingdom of heaven. But anyone who obeys our Creator's laws and teaches them will be called great in the kingdom of heaven." And then it goes on to say in Matthew 5:20, "But I warn you, unless your righteousness is better than the righteousness of the teachers of religious law and the Pharisees, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven." Now that is Matthew 5:17 to 20 in the New Living Testament. Now we're going to get more into the Hebraic translations and kind of see more of a clearer understanding of that scripture. And now we're going to look at David Stern's translation, which is called the Complete Jewish Bible, and that's what the cover looks like there. And now this is a scripture. The reason why I'm excited about this scripture is one of the main purposes of this series, Yeshua Said, is to tell people or show people that no, the new covenant didn't do away with the old covenant. And just because Yeshua came, he didn't say, well, you no longer have to follow the guidelines and instructions of our Creator known as the Torah. But that's what so many people falsely believe today, because they're deceived or they're just looking for a loophole so they don't have to do the things and take responsibility for their own health. So in the Complete Jewish Bible, which is a wonderful translation, it says, "Do not think that I have come to abolish the Torah or the prophets." Now the Torah, most translations that many people are used to say law, but Torah means the instructions and guidelines of our Creator. The law is something many people falsely think means Torah, but it doesn't. Torah and law is not the same. Law is really man's made tradition. Torah is the instructions and guidelines of our Creator. So it says here in this translation, "Do not think that I have come to abolish the Torah or the prophets." And then it says, "I have come not to abolish, but to complete. Yes, indeed, I tell you, until heaven and earth pass away, not so much as one yod or stroke will pass from the Torah, not until everything must happen. So whoever disobeys the least of these mitzvahs and teaches others to do so will be called the least in the kingdom of heaven. But whoever obeys them and so teaches will be called great in the kingdom of heaven. For I tell you that unless your righteousness is far greater than that of the Torah teachers and the Pharisees, you will certainly not enter the kingdom of heaven." So that's a much clearer translation, and it translates the word law into Torah, which is the way it's supposed to be. And even with the clear translation or the other translations, many people would still get confused or misuse these scriptures. So I'm going to explain them today. Most of the translations will say, "Do not think I have come to destroy the law, but I came to fulfill it." And they use the word fulfill. Well, I'm going to use this translation here that we're going to discuss today. This is the One New Man Bible, and at the bottom of it, it says, revealing Jewish roots and power. And this is one of my favorite translations. I usually don't like the commentary in Bibles, but this one I absolutely love because they're doing it from a Hebraic standpoint. And that's how Yeshua Messiah himself taught, from a Hebraic standpoint. So we're going to look at what it says here, and then we're going to talk and break it down, and we're going to discuss this chapter, what it really means and what he's really saying. And so what he's really saying here, or what he really means in Matthew 5:17, it says, in this wonderful translation, "Do not think that I have come to do away with or bring an incorrect interpretation to the Torah or the prophets. I did not come to do away with, but to bring spiritual abundance for the Torah to be obeyed as it should be, and our Creator's promise to receive fulfillment. For truly I say to you, until the sky and the earth would pass away, not one yod or one vav could ever pass away from the Torah until everything would come to pass. Therefore, whoever would break one of the least commandments and would teach people this way, they will be called the least in the kingdom of the heavens. But whoever would do the commandments and would teach them, they will be called great in the kingdom of the heavens. For I say to you that unless your righteousness would be present in abundance, more than that of the scribes and Pharisees, you could not enter the kingdom of the heavens." And I think that is an excellent translation, and we're going to talk about this and break this down now on this series. Yeshua said, first thing we want to look at Matthew 5:17. Now we're doing Matthew 5:17 to 5:20. And in Matthew 5:17 it says, "Do not think that I came to do away with or to bring an incorrect interpretation to the Torah or the prophets." So, first we got to look at who Messiah is talking to. You know, most of the people actually that wrote the scriptures or translated the scriptures or even spoke in the scriptures back then, in no way thought thousands of years later their words would be spoken today, because they thought, every generation since Messiah was here thought, this is the end, this is the last times before the Messiah returns. But here was Messiah was already there. They weren't looking for his return. They were listening to him because he just finally approached them. So now the Messiah is there, and you had a whole bunch of people that were used to listen to the Pharisee law of the man-made traditions of what we're supposed to do. And here Messiah came to bring an understanding of what exactly is supposed to happen. And these Pharisees were teaching, and the teaching of the time and the thinking of the time was not much different than the thinking of today. When Messiah comes, we no longer have to follow the laws and the guidelines and instructions of our Creator. The laws of Moses, or the instructions that our Creator gave, translated through Moses, is no longer in effect. That's what they believe. But no, Yeshua is saying, do not think that I've come to do away with, and some translation will say destroy, or to bring an incorrect interpretation. No, he's bringing a correct interpretation to the Torah or the prophets. Now, unlike all the people that wrote the scriptures that wrote it for a time back then, thinking there's no way thousands of years later these translations will still be read. Well, Yeshua said, I know what's going to happen, past, present, and future. And Yeshua knew that his word not only will be read today, but it will be spread all around the world, and everyone would read this word and have an opportunity to accept him and take the responsibility to keep his word. So it says, do not think I have come to do away with or to bring an incorrect interpretation to the Torah or to the prophets. You know, so we have to understand that there were people back then, they weren't caring or judging or helping their neighbor because they were so focused on what they had to do to keep the Pharisee laws or the man-made traditions, or even the Torah, the Torah guidelines and instructions. That's what they were focused on. When Yeshua says, I've come to show you something else, it takes it off stone and puts it on a heart. So now not only are we responsible to keep these guidelines and instructions, the Torah, for ourselves, but we have a responsibility to be watchmen as believers and make sure our friends and our neighbors are also in the correct understanding and also keeping the guidelines and instructions so they can also get the blessings that go along with the scriptures. Now, we can't control other people, but we have a responsibility as believers and watchmen to tell other people, look, this is what the Torah says we need to do. And if they're not doing it, we need to say, you're not doing it, and you can suffer some serious consequence for this. Now, what the people decide, it's up to them. But it's our responsibility to let the people know. And at that time, the people weren't concerned with other people. They were concerned with themselves. and they were concerned to make sure that they were doing everything okay. Now you had some people that were concerned with other people, but they were adding to it what needs to be done so they can seem lifted up in front of man, and they could seem like they know more than somebody else, or they could seem that they are adding this man-made tradition so they can have this man-made power. And we're going to talk about that. But it says, do not think that I've come to bring any correct interpretation to the Torah or the prophets. Now, the prophets or the prophetic books that were being spoken about here were the books of Joshua and Judges, 1st and 2nd Samuel, 1st and 2nd Kings, and Isaiah through Malachi. All the prophetic books of the scriptures except Daniel. Daniel was not considered one of these prophetic books during that time. It wasn't one of those writings. But all of these other books were considered the prophets. And this is what Messiah was teaching from. We have to understand this, everyone. When Yeshua was teaching, there was no such thing as a New Testament or a New Covenant or Renewed Covenant. Everything he taught was from the original covenant. And the people knew it by heart. They knew the Torah by heart. And they had the other writings of the scriptures of the prophets. And he said, do not think that I've come to do away with them. So when people say the New Covenant replaced the Old Covenant, well, here Messiah right here is saying he didn't. Which leads us to the next verse. Do not think that I've come to do away with. Do not think I've come to do away with. Now, when we look at the Torah, there's 613 commands. And some of them were ceremonial commands that we had to do to cleanse ourselves. We had to go to the temple and do certain rituals. Now, there's no temple standing today, so we can no longer do those laws and those guidelines and instructions of the Torah. Now, when a temple's rebuilt, that's another story. But right now, there's no temple, so we can't technically do those. So technically, he didn't come to do away with those, but they're done away with because we can't do them right now. Now they'll be coming back when a temple comes back, but we don't have to think about those now. However, there's the civil and the moral guidelines and instructions that are given in the Torah that it says we are to keep throughout all our generations. All our generations. And that was never to be done away with and was to always be followed. And that's Messiah came and he showed us in his actions how we were supposed to do it. We take an example of Yeshua versus the Pharisees. And you talk about replacement theology. I'm going to give you real replacement theology right here. You had Yeshua at the time coming to teach the people that the Pharisees and the sages were adding to the guidelines and instructions. And Scripture warns us not to add or subtract from the word of our wonderful Creator. But that's what they were doing. And Yeshua said, look, I didn't come away to do with the guidelines and instructions. I came to bring a correct interpretation because people are adding to it and they're subtracting from it to meet their own desires, their fleshly desires, but they're not listening to the Father. And that's what we have to do. You take the Sabbath, for example. He never said the Sabbath was done away with. He just told people the correct way to observe it. That's what he did with all of the guidelines and instructions. And that's what he's explaining here. So, replacement theology, you have the Pharisees back then saying Yeshua wasn't doing enough. And today, you have the church saying, if Yeshua was here, they would call him legalistic, saying he's doing too much by keeping the guidelines and instructions of Torah. So the real replacement theology is you have the church that wants the man-made power replacing the Pharisees that wanted the man-made power. But they're still not listening to words of Messiah that said we must follow the guidelines and instructions as it was written and given to us by our wonderful Creator. That's what we have to understand. And then next it says, but to bring spiritual abundance. That's what he came for, to bring spiritual abundance. Now, most translations will say fulfill, but it says, think not that I come to destroy the law of the prophets. I come not to destroy, but to fulfill. The word fulfill means to accomplish, to do them. I did not come to destroy, but I personally, Yeshua, your Messiah, the one you say you're going to follow, came to fulfill and do these guidelines and instructions, not because you don't have to, just to show you as an example how you should be living, to show you and teach you how you should be living. Some other translations will say to accomplish their purpose. Instead of saying fulfill. Well, Yeshua's actions, that's what they're doing. He came to accomplish their purpose. And the purpose of the guidelines and instructions were to teach us a way to live so we can receive the blessings of our Creator and we don't have to worry about the circumstances of the curses that are going to happen when we disobey His guidelines and instructions. What is the true purpose of the Torah? Well, let's look at that according to Messiah and according to all of Scripture. Number one, the true purpose of the Torah, the guidelines and instructions. Remember, Torah doesn't mean law. It means guidelines and instructions of our Creator. And the guidelines and instructions of our Creator is, number one, to show our love for Him, to show how much we love Him. If you're a parent and you have a child, you discipline them and you teach them the right way and the wrong way. Why? Because you love them and you want them to be safe as possible. You want them to be as blessed as possible. So you teach them the guidelines and instructions of Scripture. So the Torah, the purpose of the Torah is to show our love for Him by being obedient to Him. But then Messiah comes and He shows us even greater purpose. He teaches us the Torah, the purpose of it is to develop an attitude of love for others. Not only for ourselves, but for others. Not only to accomplish the guidelines and instructions of the Scripture for ourselves, but to help others do it as well. That's where we're going to get the spiritual abundance. We have to understand the word abundance, as it said in the Scripture when we read. It said here, do not think that I came to do away with or bring incorrect interpretation. I did not come to do away with, but to bring spiritual abundance. We have to understand abundance. People today hear the word abundance and they think, wow, I'm going to have a lot of money, or I'm going to have big houses, or I'm going to have a lot of cars. No, that's an earthly abundance. But the Scriptures teach us something higher. The Scriptures teach us about spiritual abundance, which this must be what Messiah is talking about, because we are told and we are taught in Matthew 6:19 and Luke 12:15, and we'll talk about Matthew 6:19 in a future episode, but it says, do not store your treasures up here on earth, because the good works that you do now, you're storing up treasures up in heaven. That is spiritual abundance. It's a spiritual abundance Messiah is talking about. That's what He is talking about. Spiritual abundance, because we're not to store our treasures up here on earth, we're to store our treasures up in heaven, as it says in Matthew 6:19 to 21 and also Luke 12:15. Now we'll talk about Matthew 6:19 to 12:21 later when we do a future episode, but basically we're not to store our treasures. Our abundance here is not going to go here on earth as it will in heaven. That's what He's talking about when He says, I bring you spiritual abundance. Now we look at Matthew 5:18, and Matthew 5:18 says, for truly I say to you, until the sky and the earth would pass away, not one yod or one vav could ever pass away from the Torah, until everything would come to pass. Until everything would come to pass. Now, He's talking about, people that don't understand the Hebrew language aren't going to understand this. The yod is the smallest letter of the Hebrew language, and the vav is the second smallest letter. Not even the smallest guidelines and instructions, whether they're in His opinion or our opinion, should not be done away with. Every single thing that He told us to do, we need to accomplish. We need to accomplish for the kingdom of our wonderful Creator. That's what it says. Now, it also talks about this in Luke 16:17. And since we're reading the words of Messiah from Matthew, let's go look at what it says in Luke 16:17 about this smallest letter not coming to pass until the end. Until the end, everything would come to pass. It says in Luke 16:17. Well, let's look at the surrounding of Luke 16:17. Luke 16:14 to 18 says, it talks about Yeshua teaching about the kingdom of a wonderful Creator. It says, the Pharisees were listening to all the things, and since they were lovers of money of the earthly abundance, they were searing at Him. And He said to them that they're just justifying themselves before man, but His Father knows their hearts, because the one who is exalted among men is an abomination before our Creator. So those seeking to be lifted up before man, the Pharisees and the church, or the majority of the church today, are called an abomination before our Creator. The Torah and the prophets were proclaimed until John. From then on, the kingdom of our wonderful Creator is being preached, and everyone enters it forcibly. And it is easier for heaven and earth to pass than for one vav or of the Torah to fall. So in 16:17 it says, it is easy of Luke, it is easier for the heaven and earth to pass away than for one vav or Torah to fall. And that's what they were just talking about in Matthew 5:18. Then it goes on to say in the end of Luke 16:18, it says, everyone who divorces his wife and marries another is committing adultery, and the man who marries her when she has been divorced from her husband is also committing adultery. You understand, folks? The Bible is the world's greatest ketubah. It's a marriage contract, and it's about a feast, a wedding that is to come. And it talks about commitment. But no, man wants to glorify themselves, and they're looking for the spiritual abundance here on earth, not the spiritual abundance, the treasures that are stored up for heaven. And it says, not even the least of the commandments should be done away with. We must keep all of the commandments. In Matthew 5:19, it gives us the warning of what's going to happen if we break the commandments of Scripture. It says in Matthew 5:19, therefore, whoever would break one of the least of these commandments and would teach the people this way, they will be called the least in the kingdom of heaven. But whoever would do the commandments and would teach them will be called great in the kingdom of heaven. You understand, folks? Whoever would do the least of these commandments would be called least in the kingdoms of heaven. So, and whoever would teach them the same thing. Now the scriptures give warning after warning. Those that teach against my word will go down to the pits of hell. And you know what? Who's teaching? Who's leading the way in teaching against his word? The majority of the churches today are teaching a message that goes against the guidelines and instructions giving in Torah and the message of Messiah was teaching. They're saying we no longer have to follow the instructions of our Creator because we have Messiah now, so that's done away with. Now we could just live and get grace and everything will be fine. They're teaching hypocrisy, and this is what Yeshua came to set straight. It says in Matthew 5:20, by Yeshua Messiah himself, for I say to you that unless your righteousness would be present in abundance, more than that of the scribes and the Pharisees, you could not enter the kingdom of the heavens. Now let me clarify the scripture up for everybody. We have to understand, no, he's not talking about the Pharisees that were committing hypocrisy, teaching people that they can add or do away with the guideline instructions, but he was talking about the obedient Pharisees who were so stern on keeping the guidelines and instructions more than anything else. That's how important it was. But we have to understand there are two types of righteousness. But until we have both, we are not righteous. And Yeshua talks about we need both of these to enter the kingdom of heavens. And here's the two types. The first type is the example of the Pharisees. The Pharisees were content to obey the laws in an outward way. And, their hearts weren't necessarily changed, but their discipline was so strict that they wanted to obey the guidelines and instructions of our Creator, and they were so focused on their own righteousness or their own discipline. Now, the second form of righteousness was an example of the common Christian today. The common Christian today will say, well, we have grace, so we no longer need to keep the guidelines and instructions. They have so much love for their fellow neighbor. Yeshua said that's one of the most important commandments and the thing we should do. So they have so much love for their fellow neighbor that they're not focusing enough on themselves and what they should be doing. You can't have half of each. Complete righteousness, is both, having both of those things. So Yeshua teaches obedience, but he also teaches an attitude, a love for your neighbor. And that's what true righteousness is all about. That's what a righteous attitude. You have the spiritual obedience, and you have the spiritual attitude, and that equals the righteousness. So you have the Pharisees and many Jewish people today that have that discipline, but they're missing that love for their neighbor. And I'm not saying all Jewish people, some of them do, but this is what is taught in the Torah or the Jewish schools today. It's all about discipline. The law is more important, or the guidelines and instruction is more important than helping your fellow neighbor. That's what a big part of these teachings are about. And not all circles, there are some areas that teach different. But then Yeshua comes and says, no, you have to care just as much for your neighbor as you care for yourself. But that doesn't mean you no longer need to keep the guidelines and instructions of our Creator. So both of them will each reach this spiritual righteousness, or this abundant righteousness. Matthew 25:35-40, and we'll talk about this later, is the desire to give help to others more than help to ourselves. He talks about, when I was in jail, you fed me. You came to visit me when I was sick, and you gave me clothing when I had nothing to wear. That's taking care of your fellow man. And that's what being obedient to Scripture is all about. So being obedient and having the love for your fellow man, when you have a passion to those two things, you'll understand Yeshua's message, and you'll understand that he didn't do away with the Torah and the guidelines and instructions. You'll understand he wants us to keep it so we could receive that spiritual abundance, those treasures that are waiting up in heaven. Listen, everybody, you need to get back to the scriptures and stop listening to man, whether it's your Pharisees or your church today. If they're not teaching scripture, it's hypocrisy and abomination to our Creator. Don't take my word for it. Look at the scriptures for yourself and see what they say. If you have any comments or questions, please post them below the video. I'll be happy to discuss them with you or in a future episode. But I am telling you, folks, you need to look at the previous messages I've done on this series, Yeshua said, and get excited for the future ones. All right, everybody, go to my website and check them out on healthwatchman.com. Until then, everybody, have a great day and shalom, shalom.